This is Broadstone Leisure Centre that today stands on the site of the old Broadstone Railway Station in Dorset that closed to passengers in 1966.
Looking back to a photo taken in 1960, we see Broadstone Station as it was, a once busy junction where the rails of the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway joined the metals of the original Southampton and Dorset Railway. The old road from Southampton, Brockenhurst via Ringwood, which became known as Castleman's Corkscrew because of its meandering route. I thought I would attempt to recreate the station and a day in its life in the steam age by utilising a freeware route from the PC game Train Simulator. When I started my creation, I had no idea how many passenger trains went through the station on a working day and where they were going to and coming from. Little did I realise the rabbit hole this would lead me down.
Let's assume a July summer weekday, sometime between 1959 and 1962, and recreate a typical day's passenger traffic. It's 4:25 AM and more than half an hour before sunrise. The first service entering the station has left Salisbury at 3:17 and is going to Weymouth. It's the early morning paper train. This loco has picked up a van of morning papers originally dropped off at Salisbury by the paper train from Waterloo. The papers are now dropped off at various stations for the newsagents between Salisbury and Weymouth. Here we see a BR standard 4MT with a newspaper van and 3 billiard passenger coach set. The train stops in Broadstone for 2 minutes, as the Salisbury crew is going to swap with the Bournemouth crew of the other Class 4 engine we see waiting at the station. The Salisbury crew steam on to Wimborne, pick up the coaches for the Wimborne service through Broadstone to Eastleigh via Bournemouth Central that we see here as the next service at 5:23. Called the Workman's Train, the Salisbury crew will again be relieved by another crew at Bournemouth Central when they will ultimately take a passenger train back to Salisbury later in the morning. This is all part of a rather complicated jigsaw puzzle to ensure respective crews ultimately end their shift at their home depots. Moving on, it's now just after 6:50 AM. The inaugural pull and push service of the day arrives. Departing from Wimborne, this early morning service marks the beginning of the day's operations. At around 6 AM, two M7 engines, having picked up empty carriages at Poole, pass through Broadstone from Bournemouth Shed. One M7, coupled to its carriage, is pushing the first service to Brockenhurst from Wimborne, whilst the other we see here is pulling towards Bournemouth West. With the train about to depart, another M7 pull and push draws into the station bound for Brockenhurst, departing Broadstone 6:52. Pull and push services were created by utilising specially adapted M7 steam engines, together with vacuum air pipework through specially adapted carriages. This allowed the driver to control the engine regulator from the leading carriage cab. Electrical wiring allowed a bell communication between him and the fireman who remained on the engine. Looking at this photo, we can clearly see the apparatus mounted to the side of the engine. Stepping back a little, in researching this service I found that this Bournemouth loco was engaged on engine duty 416. Here is the internal document or diagram which detailed the daily workings of the locomotive and crew for this duty. You can see the daily movements needed to help meet the service commitments of the region. From here, this M7 goes on to work on the Lymington branch in the morning. She returns to Bournemouth around midday and then spends the afternoon working to Brockenhurst and back through to the evening when she finally returns to her Bournemouth shed. Around 10 minutes later, at just after 7 AM, arrives the first service of the day to Salisbury. This left Bournemouth West at 6:45 and will depart Broadstone 7:05. It arrives in Salisbury at 8:08. This is a strange one in that it is an Eastleigh engine duty 285 headed by a Monsor U-Class number 31626. This early morning service is the only passenger service it will daily perform. The rest of the day it's performing various freight and shunting duties around the area. The railway in the station is now long gone, and many people today don't realise that the rapid growth of Broadstone and the surrounding area is almost entirely connected with the coming of the railway. When the original Southampton to Dorset Railway opened in 1847, it bypassed a very small agricultural community around what we now call Broadstone. With further connections to Poole and Bournemouth and the joining of the Somerset and Dorset Railway, an important four-way connection was created and a station was built in 1872 at Broadstone, but at that time called New Poole Junction. These connections enabled a village and surrounding area to grow and develop around this interchange junction. This is a map of the 1861 census area in part of Dorset encompassing Broadstone. In this pink area of around 60 square kilometres there were just 2,500 people. In the enumeration district surrounded by red that included Broadstone there were just 99 homesteads with 550 people residing. If we go to the last map, the black square encompasses the Broadstone area ward of around 6 square kilometres in the 2011 census. This ward included 10,000 people alone. The possibilities and opportunities it opened to people and business by being able to move themselves and goods around the country were incredible. The railways became one of the key influences shaping societies and their communities. We don't properly appreciate the impact the railways had on British society. It changed life so utterly profoundly for people. Around 15 minutes after the Salisbury service, our next arrival is the first Somerset and Dorset service of the day, bound for Templecombe. Arriving 7:19 and departing Broadstone at 7:33, this is Bath engine duty 17. The engine on this duty, in this case BR standard 4MT 75072, although with an 82F Bath Green Park shed code, actually sheds each night at Branksome. Pre-grouping days, Branksome was owned by the Somerset and Dorset and was at this time designated a Bath Green Park subshed. For this service, this loco normally hauled a 3-coach SD set. An SD set was comprised of 3 specific bulliard multi-door 59 feet stock carriages. It was common practice in these days that train consists were quite flexible to meet customer demand. Famous Mr. Beeching found this quite wasteful, and not long after, in the 60s, the railway started moving away from meeting passenger requirements to using the same train consists throughout the year. The line up to Corfmullen was single track, requiring a token system for safety. The Tyres No. 6 electric train tablet, ETT, developed by Edward Tyre after a fatal accident in 1874, served as a physical guarantee for train crews, allowing them to proceed only when in possession of a tablet indicating their exclusive right of way. Tokens were often placed in leather pouches attached to hoops for easy transfer between the signalman and train crew. While a mechanism at Broadstone allowed for tablet exchange, locomotives were also equipped with Whittaker tablet catches for automation. Here is a picture of the inside of the Broadstone signal box, and we can see on the end wall the tyre instrument box with the hoops and pouches hanging above it. Let's have a quick look at the signal box at Broadstone. It was actually created in 2 halves, which are quite evident. The north or Wimborne end was built in 1872 with the creation of New Poole Junction and the opening of the new line to Poole and contained 17 levers. The south end was added in 1885 to manage the new link to the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway, with the signal box then having 33 levers. The next train approaching is the only daily scheduled train from Weymouth, which is going to Brockenhurst, departing 7:45 from Broadstone. It would have been unusual to see a West Country class bulliard Light Pacific on this duty, but in the last days of steam increasingly there seemed a greater flexibility in engine duty due to increasing engine withdrawals. So this particular day she is employed on Bournemouth engine duty 408, and we will see her again later in the day. Coming from Weymouth, the train arrives on the original Southampton and Dorset railway line. Although originally double-tracked, in 1932 the line was singled just beyond the Broadstone Bridge to Hamworthy Junction, so all trains coming from and to Weymouth arrived on this track. The carriage set behind 34039 Boscastle is the same one that came through on the first service of the day from Salisbury, minus the paper van, what they term a 3-set L, in this case number 773. Not only did crews and locos have to be in the right place at the right time, also the carriage sets had to be in the correct place at the right time.
This was all in the days before computers and spreadsheets, and was all done with meticulous manual application of schedules and form filling each day. Incidentally, the paper van on the earlier train will ultimately get back to Waterloo on the 16:35 Bournemouth West to Waterloo train in time for tomorrow's service. It's approaching 8 a.m. and arriving is Bournemouth Duty 416, a pull and push service from Brockenhurst to Bournemouth West, departing Broadstone at 7:59, arriving Bournemouth West at 8:14. The next service for this engine and carriage set will be the 8:30 Bournemouth West to Wareham, and then on to Swanage, where she will then ply her trade back and forth to Wareham until around 9:30 p.m, where she will be stabled in Swanage overnight. So we won't be seeing this particular loco and carriage set anymore today. By the early 60s, the standard 4 class of loco was replacing the London and South Western class T9s on the Salisbury service. However, in 59-60 there were still 3 T9s allocated to Bournemouth and 3 to Salisbury sheds, and here we see one of the allocated Bournemouth loco numbers 30710 with a 3-set L Bulliard carriage set 785 on Bournemouth Duty 411. This is a service from Bournemouth Central to Salisbury, departing Bournemouth Central 7:42 and Broadstone at 8:06, arriving Salisbury at 9:10. We will again see this engine later today on the return journey. By 1963, all 66 of the T9s built had been withdrawn. The T9 was a class of 66 steam locomotives designed for express passenger work by Dougal Drummond and introduced to services on the London and South Western Railway in 1899. Today there is just one sole surviving example preserved. This engine, number 30120, is on a long-term loan to Swanage Railway. It was running on the railway between 2017 and 2020, when unfortunately it failed its boiler test. There is now a 5-year restoration plan and hopefully will be back on track by 2029. 14 minutes later, departing Broadstone at 8:29, running in the opposite direction, is a Salisbury to Bournemouth West train. Running on Salisbury diagram number 482, we see a standard class 4MT 76017. This loco was moved to Salisbury in 1960, where she stayed until her withdrawal in 1965. She is preserved and today can be seen on the Watercress line. It's 8:35 and the next train is the P&P to Brockenhurst on duty 416. This is the same set we saw earlier at 6:52. Departing Broadstone at 8:39 is the first southbound train off the Somerset and Dorset from Templecombe. This is 7F class of loco number 53806, Templecombe 1 motive power duty. The 7Fs were a class of loco designed by Henry Fowler, specifically for the heavily graded S&D line. The locos were an instant success and were able to considerably reduce the amount of double heading which was required. They proved to be masters of the hills, free steaming and capable of lifting heavy loads with good acceleration characteristics. 11 were built in 2 batches in 1914 and 1925 and were used until withdrawal between 1959 and 1964. 2 are preserved. 53806 was a 1925 built engine and finally withdrawn in January 1964. It's now approaching 9:19 and here we see Bath 18 motive power duty going to Templecombe. Another 7F this time, 53801. One of the earlier batches built in 1914. This train departed Bournemouth West at 8:55 and after stopping at Broadstone will continue to Stolbridge, where she will await the passing of the Pines Express. She then departs Stolbridge at 10:47 and continues to Templecombe, arriving 11:01. She has a rest to 12 noon when she continues on to Bath Green Park, arriving 1:35. So quite a leisurely stroll. Moving on, this is the 9:23 P&P service returning from Brockenhurst. This is Bournemouth motive power duty 418 again. It's 10:10 and the next train entering Broadstone is the renowned Pines Express. This traversed the route from Bournemouth via Bath Green Park with carriages going to Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool and Sheffield. Originally known unofficially as the Diner, the train was officially named the Pines Express in 1927.
The Up Pines, leaving Bournemouth West at 9:45, doesn't stop at Broadstone. Motive power north of Bath was provided by the Midland Company and south by the Southern, although of course there could be quite a lot of overlapping of territory, especially when Midland engines piloted Southern ones south of Bath. In later years the route became the stomping ground of Bulliard Pacifics, BR Standard 4s, 5s, and here we see a 9F introduced from 1960, which could handle 11 coach trains unaided, only operating in summer as they had no steam heating for the carriages in the winter months. It's apt that the last Up Pines Express over the S&D was worked by the last steam locomotive built by BR, Class 9F 92220 Evening Star. Around 8 minutes later, here comes Bournemouth Duty 413. It's a through train originating from Bristol, departing Bristol at 5:58, through Bath Green Park at 6:48, stopping at all stations from Bath, arriving Bournemouth West 10:44. It departs Broadstone at 10:18 today, being hauled by another standard class 4 at 76025. It's 10:25 and here is Salisbury Duty 482 on a return to Salisbury. We last saw 76017 at 8:29 going the other way. 4 minutes later, arriving from Salisbury, departing Broadstone 10:29, this is Yeovil Duty 513, the only Yeovil shed service going through Broadstone each day. U-Class 31610 had been on early morning shunting duties at Yeovil before a passenger service takes her to Salisbury, after which she's then scheduled on this passenger service to Bournemouth West, where she turns around for a return journey later today. The U-Class are a 260 steam loco designed by Richard Maunsell for passenger duties on the Southern Railway, produced between 1928 and 1931. In 1960, Yeovil had 7 of these U-Class locos allocated. It's 10:43 and another P&P arrives on her way to Brockenhurst. Next up is returning duty Bournemouth 408, departing Broadstone 11:18. We saw her earlier on her way to Brockenhurst from Weymouth. After returning from Brockenhurst to Wimborne, this loco has been on shunting duties at Wimborne for an hour before returning to Bournemouth West. Departing Broadstone at 11:51, this train is the one P&P service from Brockenhurst that goes to Bournemouth Central rather than Bournemouth West, after which she will then travel empty to Bournemouth West, where she then commences a service back to Brockenhurst at 2:30 p.m. So we will see her again later today. Next up is the 11:40 from Bournemouth West, departing Broadstone 11:58 to Bath and on to Bristol Templemeads. This is a semi-fast service stopping at Blandford, Stern Newton, Evercreech Junction, arriving Bath Green Park at 1:53 p.m. Stopping for 7 minutes to change engines and then on to Bristol Templemeads, arriving 2:45. 53806 on Templecombe 1 duty will return to Templecombe on a later service from Bath to finish her day. It's 12:29 and here we see 9F 92201 on Bath 2 duty, the semi-fast through train from Bristol. She doesn't stop at Broadstone. In quick succession here comes 2 more push-pull services. First up departs Broadstone at 12:47 to Brockenhurst, and then 8 minutes later departing 12:55 to Bournemouth West. Push-pull sets were used extensively by the Southern Railway as it saved on the need for a loco to have to run round at the end of each journey. The adapted carriages we see here are the original ironclad London and South Western Railway type built in 1920. Between 1949 and 1952, a number of these carriages were converted for push-pull services. They were all withdrawn by 1962 due to British Transport Commission announcing a 30-year-old rolling stock rule. They were replaced by later Maunsell design converted carriages which carried on push-pull services until the final sets on the Lymington branch were withdrawn in October 1964. It's now 1:24 p.m. and the next Broadstone departure is from Templecombe going to Bournemouth West. Here we see Ivet 2MT 41248 allocated on Templecombe 3 duty. This engine was allocated to Templecombe from June-July 1953 until November-December 1960. and finally withdrawn from service in November 1964. Here is an extract from the Templecombe 3 diagram, and we can see she left Templecombe at 12:23 and will arrive Bournemouth West at 1:49. From there she will perform various shunting duties until she returns on the passenger service back from Bournemouth West at 5:30 p.m. to Templecombe. So we will see her again later this afternoon. It's 13:27 and Yeovil 513, U-Class 31610 that we saw earlier today is now returning to Salisbury. Here is the diagram for this duty, and it illustrates again how the various depot crews are intricately weaved together to achieve the schedule and ensuring each crew finish at their respective shed at day end. Departing Broadstone at 13:34 is a through train to Bristol Temple Meads, stopping at all stations, arriving Bath Green Park at 16:22, where after a change of loco then departs Bath 16:30 to arrive at Bristol Temple Meads 17:17. We saw this locomotive earlier coming through from Bath at 10:18, and we will see her again on the last duty of the day at 21:58 on her return to Bournemouth. So quite a long day. The 13:55 departure from Broadstone sees Bournemouth 411 returning from Salisbury. This is the T9 loco 30710 back to Bournemouth West. Let's talk a little about the line through Broadstone to Salisbury and Southampton. In the 19th century, having reached Southampton, the LSWR wished to extend. However, it was an independent concern, the Southampton and Dorset Railway, that built a line westwards. Its promoter, Charles Castleman, had made a rather indirect course towards Dorchester, through Ringwood and what was to become Broadstone, and the epithet Castleman's corkscrew struck with it. Ultimately it was absorbed in the LSWR in 1848. Whilst I talk a little about the line between Broadstone and Salisbury and Southampton, in quick succession we witnessed the 14:52 departure of P&P to Brockenhurst, followed at 14:54 with a P&P from Brockenhurst. Salisbury too was a desirable objective for the LSWR, which reached the city by a branch from Bishopstoke by a line that opened in 1847. The Salisbury, Poole and Dorset Junction Railway was planned to run south from a junction just south of Salisbury, reaching Westmoors on the Southampton and Dorchester line, situated between Wimborne and Ringwood. It would then connect to Castleman's Corkscrew, with a branch extending to Poole via Poole Junction, later known as Hamworthy, to serve the harbour. This is returning 9F 92001 we saw earlier at 12:29. Forget the Pines Express, we are witnessing the most important train of the day on the S&D. This is the Upmail train to Bristol, leaving Bournemouth West at 15:40, departing Broadstone at 16:02. This train carrying mail makes a connection at Mangotsfield, where the van is detached and added to the 7:20 p.m. Bristol to Newcastle postal service. Nothing was allowed to delay the run up the S&D to Bath, and she was given priority over all other trains on the single line sections. It's 16:58 and this is the Bournemouth to Brockenhurst service, and then ultimately on to Southampton. It's the first time we've seen this engine today, but she's been very busy. She started her day around 6 a.m, not only ferrying passengers between Wareham and Swanage, but also on various shunting and freight duties at Swanage, Hamworthy and Bournemouth. From Brockenhurst she steams on to Southampton and then finally a service to Bournemouth Central. It's 17:02 and we see another standard class 4 coming from Brockenhurst going to Bournemouth West. This is 76019's first passenger duty of the day. She's been on freight and shunting duties earlier in the day at Poole, Brockenhurst and Lymington. Departing Broadstone 17:12, here comes the Down Pines Express headed by West Country class 34041 Wilton. On the down run, the Pines stops at Broadstone. Little did people realise in the early 1960s that the passenger services running through Broadstone would no longer exist by 1966. Considering firstly the S&D, the primary reason for the Somerset and Dorset connection from the Bristol Channel to the south coast was related to the transportation of freight. Coal, stone, peat and milk, not passengers. The golden commercial era that had commenced around 1890 ceased following the First World War. Lorries, now superfluous to the war effort, challenged the railway's freight business, while buses started to compete for passengers from the late 1920s. Passenger traffic on the S&D was never substantial. It largely consisted of school children travelling to and from school, a small amount of commuting to work, particularly into Bath and into Bournemouth, and housewives travelling to shop and social trips to the larger towns and the seaside. Summer weekends in the 50s were the passenger heyday for the line as holiday makers from the north made their way to Bournemouth and back. Incoming is Bournemouth West to Salisbury Standard Class 4 76061 departing Broadstone 1715. We will see her on her return later this evening. Followed at 1749 by a service from Evercreech/Templecombe. This left Evercreech 8 minutes after the departure of the Pines from Evercreech, stopping at all stations, as the return Pines would stop only thereafter at Blandford, Broadstone and Poole, with finally Bournemouth West its final destination. Departing Broadstone 1755 sees the return of Ivet 2MT 41248 on a return journey from Bournemouth West back to Templecombe. She will finish her day at 1901. From 1958 the Somerset and Dorset line was placed under the control of the Western region, and this is when it all started to go even further downhill for the S&D. In 1962 the announcement was made that all through services, including the Pines Express, would be routed away from the S&D, leaving the line as little more than a local route with the through traffic going via Oxford. In 1963 the Beeching Report recommended the closure of Britain's loss-making lines, and into this category fell the Somerset and Dorset. Despite the Labour government elected in 1964 promising no further major railway cutbacks, an active campaign to save the S&D line was lost when on 6 September 1965 the closure consent covering most of the S&D was issued. That consent was followed by another for Broadstone Station and Creekmore Holt. Just as 41248 rounds the corner up to Corfmullen, appearing in the distance is the next B&P service from Brockenhurst, departing Broadstone at 1757. This is the fourth time we have seen engine 30104 today on this service, with one more to come before day end. Departing Broadstone at 1826 we see Standard Class 4 76017 approaching from Salisbury going to Bournemouth West. We will see her return to her home shed later this evening. In 1964, 2 years prior to the closure of the S&D, the services through Broadstone Station from Salisbury and Brockenhurst had ceased through the old road. In fact, the Salisbury and West Moors line, together with the middle section of Castleman's Corkscrew, through Broadstone had been two of the first passenger lines closed under the Beeching Report. At the time of closure, it was reported the cost of running these lines was between 7 to 10 times their earnings. It was in 1893 that the present direct route between Southampton and Dorchester was created via Christchurch and Bournemouth Central, and from that date the original main line through Ringwood and Wimborne and Broadstone subsequently became a secondary or diversionary route for trains from London and Southampton, and its subsequent fate was sealed. You must appreciate that the Southampton to Dorchester Railway had originally been conceived when Bournemouth was an insignificant hamlet surrounded by hilly and barren heathland. Departing Broadstone 1842 we see the return of 7F 53801 from Bath. Although Bath 18 diagram, she will spend her night in Branksome Shed. A couple of minutes later, departing Broadstone 1844 is incoming U-Class 31895 from Southampton via Bournemouth Central to Wimborne. I assume this was bringing the workmen's carriages back to Wimborne for the morning. This working was a Feltham shed diagram, the only one of the day. Approaching is T9 class loco 30120. The engine is on Eastleigh diagram 281, departing Broadstone 1910, coming directly from Southampton to Bournemouth West. As I mentioned earlier, 30120 is the sole surviving loco of her class and on long-term loan to the Swanage Railway. Departing Broadstone at 1913, we see the last up Somerset and Dorset passenger service of the day to Templecombe, hauled by Standard Class 4 76026. This engine will pause in Templecombe for just under an hour and then take a service to Bath Green Park, where she will spend the night. However, the stop in Templecombe allows the Bournemouth crew to swap with the Bath crew. The Bournemouth crew will then take the last down train of the day, from Templecombe to Bournemouth West that we will see as the last service of the day through Broadstone. With lengthening shadows departing Broadstone at 19:30, we see the arrival of the last M7 P&P service to Brockenhurst for the day. An hour and a half after we last saw her, 76017 makes her return to Salisbury, departing Broadstone at 20:11. This is the last train to Salisbury for the day. Just over an hour later at 21:12, approaching is returning T9 engine 30120 to Brockenhurst from Bournemouth West, and then a final service on to Eastleigh, her home shed. Departing Broadstone at 21:33, this is returning locomotive 76061 from Salisbury to Bournemouth Central. Although an Eastleigh engine on diagram 276, she will stable tonight at Bournemouth Loco Shed. Finally, the last P&P service of the day. Departing Broadstone at 21:43, we see our friend M7 30104 returning home. So this is the last time we will see 30104 today. This particular engine was withdrawn in 1961 after nearly 100 years of service. Looking at this picture of her at Broadstone, let's reflect on the thousands of miles of service she gave. The day is finally coming to an end, as appearing out of the gloom, the final service of the day approaches around the curve from Corfmullen. This is returning engine 76025 on a return service from Bath, departing Broadstone at 21:58, and which ends our working day at Broadstone. It seems incredible that today, as we gaze at the leisure centre, back in the 1960s, here was a train station that saw over 50 passenger train workings every day, even more on a summer weekend to and from all points north, plus numerous freight workings. Within 2 years, commencing 1964, all of these passenger services were to disappear. What remained were a couple of goods lines, one to serve a goods depot at Blandford Forum via a stub off the S&D, and one which passed through Wimborne to serve the RAOC fuel depot at West Moors. The Blandford Forum freight line closed and was lifted in 1969. The goods traffic to Wimborne maintained a track running through the site until 1977, after which the track was lifted and the land sold for redevelopment. To be honest, looking back, everything I have read about both the S&D and the old road points to the fact that they must have been losing money for a majority of their working lives. However, there is no doubt they made over those years a huge positive contribution to the growth of the surrounding areas that is inestimable. I've done my best to give you a taste of the workings of the passenger railway around Broadstone, both within the limitations of the train simulator software and my own knowledge. These final photos are Peter Russell's from the website Wimborne and East Dorset Railways. If you are really interested in learning more detail of the railways around the area, I would strongly suggest you visit the site, as it is a very well detailed, in-depth resource.